Common question in home theater and hi-fi that I see discussed quite a lot, and I've actually been fielding directly with some folks in comments and in some consulting sessions, has to do with separates. Do I need separates? Do I want separates? And perhaps how do you segue into separates? So, as somebody that has a big old stack of separates and used receivers for quite a while in my home theater journey before this, I feel uniquely qualified to talk about this topic. So I have a few ideas here about why and how to consider adding separates, external amplifiers, to your setup, and a few tips when actually doing so. And I'll start by saying off right away that, one of the reasons that I think a lot of people consider separates, I like them as well. It's just cool. I think really having separates, having external amplifiers is kind of it's the end game, the end goal, probably for most people in this hobby. That's not to say that receivers aren't awesome. There's some really great receivers out there, and in a lot of installations, in order to achieve playback volume necessary and good quality audio, you don't have to have separates. Receiver amps, internal amplifiers do really work great in a lot of cases. That all said, having some external amps, even a few to get started, is, again, I think it's the end game, it's the pinnacle, it's the hot rod way to go about this hobby. And so I think a lot of folks aspire to achieve that in their setup regardless. And awesome, great, it's fun, more power to you, if that's the way that you want to go. Do it, have fun, enjoy it. But some common reasons that you may actually really need, or specifically how to consider adding an external amp to your system, may boil down to the fact that you have a receiver and you just need more amplifier channels. It's very common nowadays that receivers will come with the ability to process more speaker channels than they actually include in the boxes. I'm going to talk a little bit about Anthem here because I know Anthem products very well. So specifically the MRX receiver line in Anthem, every one of those devices processes more channels than the box is actually capable of amplifying, and that's really the case fairly prolifically around other brands in this hobby. So right off the bat, if you're building up a system over time, maybe you bought a receiver and a certain quantity of speakers, and now you want to add to that system. You're adding some extra surrounds, you're adding some Heights or Dolby Atmos type speakers, and you have the ability to do the processing in your current receiver, and you just don't have enough amplifier channels. So here we go. Add something external, and you don't have to change your receiver, you don't have to change your processing, and get other benefits from it, as we're going to talk about. So if you are going to segue into separates, I would recommend always focus on your mains, essentially. If you're going to add an external amplifier, the speakers that you want to get on that external amplifier is that big left, that big right, and I would also recommend your center. If you're talking about a multi-channel home theater setup and you're looking to add separates, I strongly recommend actually look for a 3-channel amplifier and get your LCRs on that external amp together. Don't just focus on your left and right channels. The center channel in home theater is really important as an integral part of that entire front soundstage of audio. A lot of amplifier makers have 3-channel, really great 3-channel options. And so, again, strongly recommending, if you're going to start moving stuff out of your receiver or moving into separates, that 3-channel is definitely the way to go, in my opinion. So what do you get out of doing that? Well, from an audiophile perspective, maybe you get better detail, maybe you get more clarity, maybe those amps are better than the amps in your receiver, maybe you actually don't notice any of that, maybe there's a placebo effect. But what we do know for sure is that those mains, the LCR, that front soundstage, it's really where the majority of our audio impact comes from when watching movies and other content. Yeah, we have all these other speakers around us, but the load they carry in a soundtrack is a whole lot less than what's coming out of that front soundstage. So by going the 3-channel route, by getting that front soundstage on an external amplifier, you're taking the most demanding load off of your receiver. And by doing so, you're actually freeing up power for the receiver to have better power delivery to the remainder of the surround and the Height speakers that may be attached to it. Hopefully the box will run a little bit less hot. You're basically just taking strain off of that receiver. And by taking strain off of your receiver, you're giving it the ability to do a better job of everything else that it's still doing. So it's not uncommon for people to go from a receiver to adding a 3-channel LCR external amplifier to say like the performance of my surrounds and my Dolby Atmos speakers, my height speakers, actually improved, still leaving them on the receiver's amplifiers, but by taking those other channels off. Again, because power delivery in a receiver, there's a lot of stuff usually going on inside of a receiver and all of its engineering design and so on. And taking load out of that allows it to apply that load, that capability, to the remainder of the things that are still attached to it. So again, not only are you benefiting your mains, you would also be benefiting your entire audio system in the process. And so I think that's why the LCR external amplifier is the perfect segue. The other part of that being, the amount of power that your surround speakers and your heights actually need to draw to do their jobs in a home theater setup is nowhere near as much as we think it is. So it's very common, even if you go full separates, right, that maybe you go a little bit less, or the amplifier that you choose for your mains is something a little bit less than the amplifier that you may choose for those other channels. Not everybody goes that way. Other folks might keep things very specifically consistent. However, I think that's a viable way to go as well. And in fact, I've ran my theater now for a number of years with a trifecta of Parasound Halo amps with an A31 delivering more to my LCR speakers, and all of my surround and Atmos channels being driven off of a little bit lesser A52 Plus. My main speakers they're all in walls, but they're the larger speaker in that Focal series. They're more akin to essentially a tower style speaker, where all of my other positions are smaller rounds or bookshelf style speakers, perfectly fine on the lesser A52s. So a couple of other tips related to considering segueing into adding an external amplifier and how to go about doing that. One is right up front, if you're speccing out a new system, you're speccing out a new receiver, you're looking to build that up over time, always plan for a model, look for a model, shop for a model, assuming that you can afford it, of course, that has preamplifier outputs so that you maintain the flexibility and the option to make this choice later on without having to be forced to replace a receiver as well if you wanted to make this segue. Nowadays, more and more receivers, including downline ones, actually include preamp outputs, and you want to look for one that actually is notable for having a good, quiet, and well-structured preamp output. I'll mention it again, Anthem. Go watch the Audioholics videos all about the Anthem MRX receivers, amongst the best, basically, of preamplifier outputs. But Denon, Marantz, Onkyo, like all of these brands allow you to do this. And in general, I'd say they're all pretty good with it. One of the other things that kind of comes up with thinking about tips for adding external amplifiers is how are you going to connect them? Generally speaking, we have two methods. We have regular RCA style cables and we have XLR style cables. If you can do it, I would always recommend using an XLR connection between whatever audio processor you may have and the amplifiers that they are connecting to, but that's not always feasible. And if you're talking about adding an external amplifier to a receiver to get started, by and large, receivers don't generally carry XLR outputs. That's more for when you're going full separates and you have a standalone audio processor like an AVM70 or something along those lines. Also, you don't necessarily have to have XLR because in a lot of cases, I would suspect you probably have the amplifiers and the receiver or the processor that's feeding them in pretty close proximity to each other. XLR comes more into play when you have longer cable runs, maybe particularly to a subwoofer that may be located farther out somewhere in a room. One of the main benefits of XLR is being less susceptible to noise and interference, but when you're talking about cable lengths that might be a couple of feet or maybe more than that at best, there's really not going to be any difference between RCA and XLR. Again, if you can do it, why not? Do XLR cables. It is the superior connection, but if you can't and everything is nicely co-located, don't sweat it. But I would also recommend don't go buying crossover cables unless you have specifically a reason to. So there's plenty of cables out there that offer the ability to kind of interchange RCA connection on one end and an XLR connection on another end. And I don't recommend that again unless you really have a specific reason to consider it. And the only reason that you would really have to consider it is you're trying to interconnect two devices and you have no choice of inputs or outputs. I've been in some situations with my equipment where I had something that was XLR that was XLR output only, trying to connect to something that may be RCA input only, and so then you have to use the crossover cable. But in most cases, a lot of external amplifiers will have individual connections for either or, meaning there's an RCA input and an XLR input. Usually there's a toggle switch or something that you have to set to indicate to the amp, okay, which of these inputs is actually the active one that I'm using. So as much as possible, stay RCA to RCA or XLR to XLR. Don't cross it over unless you have a very specific reason to, by a limitation of your equipment. I think separates are really cool. I think it should definitely be part of the forward-thinking home theater hi-fi journey that you may be on. Focus on those mains, and if all you ever end up with in your system is a receiver and an external 3-channel amplifier, that's a heck of a home theater setup. And with a good receiver, pragmatically speaking, you probably don't even need to go further than that. So again, lots of great options for receivers. I'm an Anthem fanboy. I would highly recommend those MRXs. They fit the bill perfectly for some of the criteria and the tips that I'm talking about here. And there are so many good 3-channel amplifier options out there. Anthem has them right in the MCA series as well. Parasound has them. Emotiva has them. All the Class D makers have them in custom configurations and such. So no shortage of options there. But hey, if you're shopping, and particularly if you want that Anthem stuff, check out one of the channel affiliates here, Audio Advice, great company. They sell the whole stack of equipment from Anthem. Check down in the description below, use my referral code TECHthusiasm, or follow the links that are provided, and the channel will get a little bit of benefit from there. There's also other ways to support if you feel so inclined, super thanks, channel memberships, and more. Thanks so much for watching. Let me know if you have any more questions about this. Let me know as well. Did you have a receiver and you took some steps forward in your home theater, your audiophile journey, to add some external amplifiers? Did you add a 2 or 3 channel first? What did you think about it? Did it make a difference? Sound off in the comments and share your experience for others. And again, if there's other questions about this idea, post them in the comments, or hey, come to one of my next live streams and let's talk about it there. Otherwise, please do all the regular YouTube stuff like subscribe, share the video, hit the bell. Thanks so much for watching, and come on back for more home theater discussion and fun. Because hey, home theater and hi-fi is more fun with external amplifiers.